We went to the gate, but that led onto the parking lot with the embassy on the other side. And they said, okay, stay very low, run around the edge, stay close to the wall, and there's a door on the other side of the embassy there. You can see, go through that door. Okay, ready, go. So we ran, and I'm carrying one little kid. The father's carrying another kid, and the mother's carrying this suitcase. And so, you ask yourself, if you were told that morning that you're going to be leaving your country forever and you can only bring one suitcase, what would you put in that suitcase? I don't know, but it would be pretty important. It would be the most precious things you have, whether it's money or pictures or whatever it is, it's going to be precious. So anyway, we get around and we get into the stairwell that leads up to the embassy, and we're going very, very slowly because it's just, a few people would get on a helicopter, it would take off, and then if we'd move up a little bit, then another helicopter would take off. Anyway, it took at least an hour to get up these stairs. Really hot inside, noisy and scary, and some people are crying, and it was really something. Finally, we got up and went into the embassy building and walked down a hallway and one last stairway that went up to the rooftop. And I had the kid, and I was the first out. Went through, climbed on the helicopter, and sat there and looked behind me, and all these other people started getting on, but the mother and the father and the one more kid weren't there. They weren't getting on the helicopter. And I thought, where the heck are they? And the whole helicopter filled up, and the parents weren't there. And I thought, oh my God, what if they were killed on the roof and I have the last orphan in my arms that I'm taking out of Vietnam? How ironic would that be? And then I looked at this kid and he looked at me and I thought, oh my gosh, are you my son? Um, and eventually, though, the father got on, and then the mother's almost thrown on, and she doesn't have the suitcase. And so, what had happened is that she dropped the suitcase on the roof, and it had broken open. And the tremendous wind from the helicopter, really windy, blew all of her stuff all over the roof of the embassy. And so she's trying to gather it all up. And these soldiers, of course, have no patience for some screaming little Vietnamese lady, grabbed her and just threw her on the helicopter without all of their stuff.
Wow.
So with that, we took off and zigzagged our way out to the coastline. I was sitting near the back was open, and I was sitting right at the back, so I had a great view of the city as we were flying out.
Wow.
And the first thing I noticed was how many fires there were. The whole city seemed like it was burning. Not the whole city burning, but lots of fires all around. And you could also see the tracer bullets both come from the ground to the air, from the air down to the ground, some, between, um, in the air, it was like this, the lights and the flashing and the fires were everywhere, and interesting but kind of scary. We thought I could actually see people shooting up from the ground at us, and our helicopter was armed, and they shot back down in the direction that these uh, bullets that were coming up at us from. And so, still, I was 20 years old and thought I'd live forever. So I can't say that I really thought, oh my God, I'm going to die. But definitely, the fingers were crossed, hoping that we would make it out safely, which, ultimately we did. And so it was, pretty spectacular. The power station near where we had lived out in the countryside was on fire. I could see that. And it was pretty harrowing getting out there. Meanwhile, I'm holding this kid, and the family's there, and the mom's crying, and there was a lot of emotion, I think, on the plane. Very loud. You couldn't hear anything. In fact, when I first got on the helicopter, somebody giving me some cotton to put in my ears because it's so loud, which I was glad to have. Although it's funny because when I got off the helicopter, I'd forgotten that I had the cotton in my ears, and people were talking to me. I couldn't hear what they said until finally, oh yeah, take the cotton out. Um, but when we hit the water, there was definitely a relief, and the guys that were manning the guns on our helicopter, they both kind of sat back and you could really see them have a visible sigh of relief. And then it was just black below us with the ocean and continued to be black for a way. You can see some little lights out on the sea, but not much. And then finally we began to see, I could see the guys pointing down at something, and I, began to see, fairly bright lights. And as we got down toward it, I thought, my God, it looks like there's an airport down there. I didn't, where, is there an island? Where could this airport be? And as we got closer, I realized it was an aircraft carrier. But my gosh, that, for me, the first time I'd ever been on one, or seen an aircraft carrier up close, it just felt like it was huge, and a floating airport. So, as we got closer, we came in and we landed. And so there was interesting, exciting, scary, relieved, all of those feelings, also sad because, Vietnam's gone now. It's gone. The whole thing's over. Wow, this is how it's ending. It just felt, it's hard to put my finger on it exactly, but there was definitely, sadness that that's how it had to go.
And if I have it right, following, so you get to the USS Midway, and then over the next hours, do you witness what you hear, what I've heard veterans who were part of Operation Frequent Wind, what they talk about, helicopters just coming from nowhere, other aircraft coming from nowhere, people who are just fleeing Vietnam. That you witnessed some of that yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that night, I'd landed, it was maybe, I don't know, 2 a.m. when we landed. So there wasn't a lot of activity that we were witnessing that night. We got off of our helicopter. They sorted everybody out between the Americans and the foreign diplomats and the Vietnamese refugees, and everybody kind of went their own way, and they were taking their records. And, they were very nice to us. We kind of got in a line and went inside the Midway, and there were some people sitting at a desk, and they asked what our name was and if we had any ID, just kind of verify who we were and what our job was. Just, but in a very, very, polite and orderly, organized way. And they said that later we'd be able to send a message home, but not tonight. And they said that there was some food on board for us, and that somebody would lead us to where our bunk was. So they, which they did, went, found the bunk, and eventually went to the kind of restaurant there where they had great food. I was really like, wow, you guys eat like this? They put out a nice dinner for us. So, and people are kind of quiet and reserved, but talking about, wow, I walked, 25 miles from such and such city and finally got on the helicopter. And the guy in the bunk right next to mine had broken his foot because he jumped off the wall of the embassy into the embassy ground. And when he landed, he broke his foot. So he had this cast on, or first it was a bandage, and then the doctors on the ship, put a cast on him. And everybody had an amazing story to tell for having gone through all of that. But it was the next day, though, we were able to, we didn't have just free roam of the ship. There were areas where we were allowed to hang out, but we wanted to go outside the ship and kind of tour the deck and so on. That would be done, under escort with some of the guys there, which they'd love to do, and they were very nice to us and showing us around. Very proud of their ship, meeting the fighter pilots and meeting the various people there. It was really interesting. But yes, we did see a lot of helicopters coming and landing. I didn't know for sure where they were all coming from, but the most significant story that happened on the Midway, and we happened to be outside when all this happened, is that there was a small Cessna that just appeared out of nowhere and began flying, circling around the Midway. And nobody really quite knew who they were, what was going on. Then at one point, a shoe comes flying out of the airplane onto the deck and then bounces into the ocean. And we thought, oh no. He comes around again, and we thought, well, he must be trying to send us a message. We couldn't figure out why they weren't communicating by radio, but people speculated he was on a different frequency or something like that. And so he comes around again, and another shoe drops. And this one manages to land on the deck, and one of the sailors went out there and grabbed it, opened it up, saw a note inside, and ran off to give it to the captain. And the note, we later learned, said, Could you please move those helicopters out of the way so I can land? Signed, Colonel Bong, wife, and 5 children. He's in a two-seater Cessna airplane. My wife and 5 children are in this plane. Oh my gosh. So they had initially wanted him to ditch into the ocean. So as he went up around, they had one of their rescue helicopters following him around, thinking he would ditch in the ocean, and then it would jump in and rescue him from this rescue helicopter. But when they realized there were 5 kids on there, that wasn't going to work. So in order to make room for him to land on the runway there on the deck, they started pushing helicopters off into the ocean and pushed a number of them into the sea, and then made a barrier of some of the other helicopters and some of the tractors that pull the planes around at one end of the runway, so of the deck of the ship, so that if he went too far, it would catch him, so he didn't go off the edge the other way. And so once it was clear, he went around and he sort of made his landing and came in, rickety, and I mean, touched down, and sure enough, stopped. It was totally safe landing, and everyone's cheering, and it was a great moment.